Why did her body move before her mind had time to ask permission? The sound was wrong, too clean, too metallic. It slid across the marble floor beneath the noise of laughter and polished shoes like a whisper meant only for her. Mara didn't turn her head right away. She didn't need to. Her shoulders tightened first. Her breathing slowed. The part of her that had survived places without names had already made the call. This wasn't clumsiness. This wasn't coincidence. This was physics and timing, and someone about to get hurt. She had been invisible all morning, and that was exactly how she preferred it. Plain white blouse, gray slacks, rubber-soled boots chosen for silence, not style, a temporary badge clipped low enough that no one ever bothered to read it. She moved through the conference center before sunrise, stacking programs, checking microphones, wiping fingerprints from glass podiums that would soon be framed by flags and authority. No one greeted her. No one thanked her. No one remembered her name. That used to hurt. Now it felt like armor. She learned long ago that being unseen meant being underestimated, and being underestimated meant freedom to observe. She counted exits without thinking, measured distances by instinct, not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't turn it off. Her eyes caught reflections in mirrored walls. Her ears filtered voices the way other people filtered music. 30 minutes before the sound, she had been on her knees in the VIP lounge, scrubbing a coffee stain out of imported carpet while a senator's wife discussed beachfront renovations like the world had never bled. Latte dripped from the woman's cup, splashing Mara's shoulder. No apology, no eye contact, just the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to notice who cleaned up after them. Mara absorbed it without reaction. She always did. She finished the stain, stood, was told to pick up a discarded napkin with a snap of manicured fingers. She did, but her eyes lingered just for a second on the loose clearance band around the woman's wrist. A security violation, logged mentally, filed away. That was when she saw the child. 7 years old, navy dress with tiny white anchors. A stuffed bear held like it was the only solid thing in the room. The girl stood near a velvet rope that marked a restricted corridor, her small body lost in a sea of uniforms and power. Her eyes searched faces that never looked back. Mara felt something tighten in her chest, not fear, recognition. She set her clipboard down and approached slowly, lowering herself to the child's level. Introduced herself softly, offered a hand. The girl took it without hesitation, fingers warm and shaking. That kind of trust didn't come from logic. It came from desperation. Mara guided her a few steps away, chose a pillar without consciously knowing why. 2 sides of cover, reduced angles, habit masquerading as instinct. The girl's breathing came fast and shallow, panic rising as the crowd thickened. Mara shifted, placing her own body between the child and the chaos. She tapped a rhythm on the back of the girl's hand. 3 taps. Pause. 2 taps. The child focused, breath calmed. Someone noticed. Boots clicked. Authority approached like it always did, loud, certain, uncurious. Who authorized you to touch a guest? Mara stayed crouched, didn't look up. I'm keeping her safe until we find her family. The man in front of her was built like routine. Commander Blake Huxley, crisp uniform, confidence worn like a badge. He looked at her temp ID like it offended him. Your job is water bottles and chairs, he said. Step away. People smirked, laughed. A major muttered something about temps playing Secret Service. A contractor waved $100 bill like a joke with teeth. Mara didn't respond. She shifted her stance, adjusted her shadow so it covered the money. The girl whispered her name, Iris. Mara whispered back that everything was going to be okay. Someone said she didn't belong. Someone else said she looked like a janitor. Someone sanitized their hands dramatically after brushing past her shoulder. Mara felt the old ache stir, the one that came from knowing exactly who you are while the world insists on telling you who you're not. The guards moved closer. A hand grabbed her arm too hard. Iris screamed. The guard shoved the child. Mara moved. Not violently, precisely. She twisted just enough to break the grip, scooped the girl up before she hit the floor, took the impact herself, knees against marble, teeth clenched. She scanned, and then she heard it. That faint metallic scrape. Her body went cold. The sound wasn't just metal, it was tension failing, a pressure release that shouldn't have happened yet. Her nose caught it next, the faint chemical sting beneath perfume and cologne. 40 feet, improvised, unstable. There was no time to explain. Get down. Her voice cut through the room like instinct finally given permission. She wrapped herself around Iris and dropped behind the pillar, turning her body into cover. The blast cracked. Contained, sharp, violent enough to rattle glass and send screams echoing. Smoke bloomed from the exact corner she'd been watching. The room erupted. People ran, shouted, fell. And when the dust settled, the blame came down on her like it always did. She was cuffed, accused, called a decoy. Still kneeling, still shielding Iris from falling debris. She didn't protest, didn't defend herself. She focused on the child's breathing. The security footage played. Slow motion. Undeniable. Her recognition, her movement, her body choosing impact over safety. Silence followed. Then a man stepped forward. Tall, silver-haired, presence like gravity. An admiral. A father. He took his daughter into his arms, held her like he might never let go again. Then he looked at the handcuffs on Mara's wrists. And something in the room changed. She did everything right, he said. He knelt, met Mara's eyes. She pulled me out of a kill zone 12 years ago, he said quietly, and taught men twice her rank what leadership looks like. Mara didn't react. She never did. The fallout came later. Careers ended, invitations vanished, promotions froze. Mara finished her shift, clocked out, drove home. She got a note the next week, a crayon drawing, a coin pressed into her palm. She kept wearing the same clothes, kept walking the same quiet path. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear medals. Sometimes it just moves. Before anyone else knows they should. Why did the silence afterward feel louder than the blast itself? Mara noticed it first when she stepped outside into the staff parking lot that evening. The world hadn't changed. Cars still passed. Sirens still wailed somewhere far off. But the quiet inside her was different, too sharp, too clean, like a room after furniture has been stripped out. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe. The kind that waits. She sat in her truck for a long moment with the engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel, fingers still curled as if they expected resistance. Her wrists ached where the cuffs had been. Not badly, just enough to remind her how quickly respect turns into restraint when people need a target for their fear. She stared at the conference center's glass facade, reflections of flags, reflections of people who would go home tonight believing they were brave because they'd survived something. They tell the story at dinners, at fundraisers. They'd leave out the part where they laughed first. Mara started the engine and drove away. She didn't turn on the radio. She never did after days like this. Silence let the memories surface on their own terms. It let the questions come. Why had she stayed invisible for so long? It wasn't because she didn't know who she was. It was because knowing had once cost her everything. Her apartment was small, functional, no flags, no framed commendations, just a couch with one cushion that sagged more than the others, a kettle that whistled too loud, and a balcony that faced a city skyline she rarely bothered to look at. She dropped her keys into a bowl, washed her hands slowly, scrubbing at nothing in particular. The smell of ozone still lingered in her nose, phantom and stubborn. She dreamed that night of a market she hadn't seen in years. Dust in the air, sun too bright, sounds layered on sounds, voices, engines, a radio crackling orders too late. She was younger there, faster, still trying to prove something to people who didn't know how to see her. She woke before the end, heart steady but eyes open, staring at the ceiling until the first hint of dawn crept in. By morning, the story had already escaped her control. Clips of the incident circulated quietly at first, edited angles, commentary stripped of context, a civilian temp screaming in a secure facility, panic caused by incompetence. The footage that mattered, the slow-motion truth, was harder to find, buried, but not gone. Myra saw none of it. She went to work at the warehouse like any other Monday, lifting crates, checking manifests, keeping her head down. Her shoulders still carried the tension of the summit, but her movements were precise, economical. A younger worker watched her from across the bay, curious. People always got curious when silence didn't come from weakness. Around midday, the lieutenant appeared. He didn't wear his rank like a challenge. That was the first thing she noticed. He stood near the entrance for a moment, uncertain, then approached without interrupting her rhythm. He placed a unit patch on the table beside her clipboard. Mara stopped, looked at it, looked at him. There was respect there and something else. Regret maybe, or recognition. She nodded once. He walked away without another word. That night the handwritten note arrived. Thick paper, careful ink, no flourish, just gratitude, just acknowledgement. Iris's drawing slid out with it, two stick figures holding hands under uneven stars. My hero, written in letters that leaned like they were still learning balance. Mara sat on the edge of her couch for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't cry. Tears had never come easily to her, but something softened, something she'd kept locked down because it had once made her slow. She folded the drawing carefully and placed it in a drawer she rarely opened. The next week brought meetings she didn't attend and consequences she didn't witness. Commander Huxley was relieved of duty pending investigation. The contractor's firm lost contracts. The aide disappeared from invitations like she'd never existed. People whispered about accountability and lessons learned. Mara kept loading crates. On Saturday, she volunteered at the Veterans Center like she always did, taught kids how to spot exits without explaining why, showed them how to breathe through panic by tapping patterns on their wrists. Parents watched her with polite curiosity. They saw calm. They didn't see the cost. One boy asked her once if she was a soldier. She smiled gently. I was a lot of things. He seemed satisfied with that. But the quiet didn't last. It never does. 2 weeks later, she was approached again, this time by a woman in plain clothes who knew exactly where to stand so she wouldn't block Mara's exit path. The woman introduced herself with a first name only, spoke carefully, asked if Mara would consider consulting, just talking, off the record. Mara listened without interrupting. The woman mentioned training gaps, civilian response times, threat recognition outside uniformed frameworks. She mentioned the summit without nomming it, mentioned how close it had come to being worse. You don't owe anyone anything, the woman said, but you see things others don't. Mara looked past her through the open bay doors at the street beyond. Cars passed. Life moved on. I didn't save the world, Mara said quietly. I shielded a child. The woman nodded. That's usually how it starts. Mara didn't answer right away. She felt the familiar pull, the weight of responsibility trying to settle back onto her shoulders. She had set it down for a reason, carried it long enough that it had reshaped her spine. But she also remembered Iris's grip, the way fear had eased when someone competent took control without making a show of it. I'll think about it, she said. That night she sat on her balcony and traced the scar on her forearm, the one that never tanned. She thought about the people she'd lost, the ones she'd left behind, the cost of stepping forward versus the cost of staying silent. She thought about how easily people confuse volume with authority, and how danger rarely announces itself with drama. It whispers, it slips, it waits for complacency. Weeks passed. The world moved on to the next outrage, the next clip, the next headline. Mara's name faded from conversation, just the way she liked it. But something had shifted. At the warehouse, people stopped joking around her, not out of fear, out of awareness. They noticed how she positioned herself near exits, how she listened more than she spoke, how she stepped in front of a forklift once without raising her voice, stopping an accident before it happened. At the Veterans Center, a fellow volunteer asked her for advice about a panic attack. Mara didn't lecture, she just sat, breathed, waited. At night, she slept a little better. Until the call came. It was late, past midnight, unknown number. She considered letting it ring, then answered. Mara, the voice said, calm, familiar. We have a situation. She closed her eyes. Not because she was afraid. Because part of her had known this moment would return. Where, she asked. The address came with coordinates, the kind that didn't make the news until afterward. She hung up and stood in the dark of her apartment, listening to the hum of the city. She moved slowly, deliberately, pulled on boots, checked pockets out of habit. She didn't grab a weapon. She hadn't carried one in years. As she stepped outside, she felt the old weight settle, not like a burden but like alignment, like something clicking back into place. She wasn't eager. She wasn't proud. She was resolved. Because sometimes strength isn't about charging forward. Sometimes it's about standing up again. When you promised yourself you were done. Why did the road feel longer when she already knew where it would end? The city thinned as Mara drove. Streetlights gave way to darkness broken only by the occasional warehouse lamp or passing truck. The coordinates led her away from anything polished, away from glass and marble, toward a place where mistakes didn't echo, they buried themselves. She kept both hands on the wheel, posture loose but alert, breathing slow. Her pulse stayed even. It always did when things became real. She hadn't asked for details on the phone. She never did. Details came later when they mattered. Right now, what mattered was mindset. She let the warehouse fade from her thoughts. Let Iris's drawing settle into a quiet corner of her mind. She didn't romanticize what she was walking into. That was a mistake people made when they wanted to feel brave. Mara didn't need to feel brave. She needed to be useful. The building was an abandoned transit hub on the edge of the industrial district. Half-demolished plans stalled by funding disputes and political fatigue. A skeleton of concrete and rusted rails. Temporary fencing sagged around it like a tired apology. She parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest, boots silent against cracked pavement. A woman met her near the perimeter, same one from the warehouse, same careful distance, same awareness of exits. "Thank you for coming," the woman said. Myra nodded once. "Tell me what you know." "Not much," she admitted. "That's why you're here." Inside, the air smelled of damp concrete and old oil. Flashlights cut narrow cones through the darkness. A small team waited, no uniforms, no insignia. Faces set in that particular way people get when they're trying not to look at one another for reassurance. Mara felt the familiar itch between her shoulders, the sense of being the only one hearing the room breathe. "What's missing?" she asked. They exchanged glances. A man finally spoke. "A girl." The word landed heavier than it should have. "She wandered off," he continued. 8 years old, father works nights nearby. Security footage shows her entering the structure an hour ago, then nothing. Mara closed her eyes for half a second, not long enough for anyone to notice. "Anyone else inside?" she asked. "Possibly," the woman said. "We picked up anomalous readings, nothing confirmed." Mara adjusted the strap of her bag. "You called too many people." The man frowned. "We needed coverage." "You needed quiet," Mara replied. "Crowds make children hide." She stepped past them without waiting for permission. The interior swallowed sound. Broken tiles crunched softly underfoot. Water dripped somewhere deep, rhythmic and deceptive. Mara moved slow, counting steps, mapping the space in her head. She didn't use her flashlight much. Light made people feel safe. Darkness told the truth. She noticed the signs right away. A scuffed footprint too small to belong to an adult. A smudge on a wall at child height. Panic written in the way the marks zigzagged instead of moving straight. "She's scared," Mara murmured. No one answered. They were learning to let her speak when she needed to. They found the backpack first. Pink, unicorn zipper, dropped near a stairwell like it had been let go rather than discarded. Mara crouched, touched it lightly, still warm. "Recent," she said. She didn't mean to leave it. A sound echoed from above. Not a voice, not quite, a breath caught in the wrong place. Mara raised a hand. The team froze. She tilted her head, listening, counted seconds, measured distance. "There's someone else," she said quietly, "and they're not calm." They moved upward carefully, spacing themselves without being told. Mara stayed in front, not because she wanted control, but because her body already knew where to step. She found the girl huddled behind a broken ticket booth, knees drawn to her chest, eyes wide and unfocused. The child flinched when the light touched her. Mara lowered herself slowly. "Hey," she whispered, "you didn't do anything wrong." The girl's lip trembled. Tears streaked through dust on her cheeks. "I'm lost," she whispered. "I know," Mara said, "but you're not alone." She held out her hand, didn't rush, didn't promise, just waited. The girl took it. That was when the other presence moved. A shadow detached itself from the far corner. A man, disheveled, eyes darting, hands shaking. Not a mastermind, not a monster. Just someone whose life had collapsed inward until this moment felt like the only place left to stand. He raised his voice too quickly. "Don't come closer." Mara positioned herself subtly between him and the girl, not aggressive, just present. "No one's here to hurt you," she said. He laughed, sharp and brittle. "That's what they always say." She recognized the look. She'd worn it herself once, after a night that ended with fire and didn't give answers. "You don't want this," Mara said gently. "You don't want to be remembered this way." The man's grip tightened around something metal. Not a gun, cruder, unstable. The team behind her tensed. Mara didn't. "You're tired," she said. "You've been tired for a long time." His eyes flickered, confusion, recognition. "She looked at me," he said suddenly, "like I mattered." Mara nodded. "Kids do that, they don't know how not to." The silence stretched. The girl's fingers tightened around Mara's hand. "It doesn't end here," Mara said, "but it can pause just for a second." The man's shoulders sagged. The metal clattered to the floor. The team moved in swiftly, carefully. No shouting, no heroics. When it was over, the girl leaned into Mara's side, exhausted. "You saved me," she whispered. Mara shook her head softly. "You saved yourself, I just stayed." Outside, dawn crept in, pale and tentative. The father arrived breathless, eyes red, collapsing to his knees when he saw his daughter. He thanked everyone, over and over. Mara stepped back. She always did. As the scene dissolved into relief and paperwork, the woman from the warehouse approached again. "You could come back," she said. "Help us train, help us see." Mara watched the sun rise over broken concrete, turning rust into something almost beautiful. "I don't want a title," Mara said, "and I won't wear a uniform." The woman smiled faintly. "We weren't going to offer either." Mara considered that. Considered the pattern forming, not missions but moments, not commands but choices. She nodded once. Because redemption didn't look like applause. It looked like showing up again. When no one was watching. And choosing restraint over recognition. Why did she hesitate when the door finally closed behind her? Mara felt it in the quiet that followed, the kind of quiet that doesn't belong to empty rooms but to decisions already made. The transit hub faded behind her as dawn took shape, pale and undecided, like it was still asking permission to arrive. She stood for a moment with her hands in her jacket pockets, breathing in the cold air, grounding herself in the ordinary. Sirens in the distance. A delivery truck rattling over uneven asphalt. Life insisting on continuing. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt the familiar tightening behind her ribs. The sense that stepping back in, even without a uniform, even without a title, meant reopening doors she'd sealed shut for survival. The woman from the warehouse walked beside her toward the vehicles, matching her pace without crowding her space. That told Mara more than any resume could. "You don't have to decide today," the woman said. "I know," Mara replied, "but I will." She always did. Prolonged uncertainty had never been her style. It burned energy without producing clarity. She preferred clean lines, even when the cost was high. They exchanged a look that wasn't agreement yet, but wasn't resistance either. Mara drove home as the city woke fully. Commuters flooded the roads, faces already tight with anticipation and dread. She wondered how many of them had walked past danger that morning without knowing it. How many assumed safety was something permanent instead of something borrowed. At her apartment, she showered longer than usual, letting the heat work the stiffness out of her shoulders. The mirror caught her reflection, hair damp, eyes older than they used to be. She studied the faint scar near her collarbone, the one no uniform ever covered properly. She remembered earning it, remembered the price. She dressed simply and slept for a few hours, the kind of sleep that hovered on the edge of waking. When she rose again, her phone held a single message. "Tomorrow, 800, quiet location." She stared at the screen, then set the phone face down. The next morning she arrived early. She always did. The location was unmarked, an office space above a closed dental clinic, its windows frosted, its entrance forgettable. Inside, the room was sparse. Table, chairs, whiteboard with no writing, coffee that smelled like it had been sitting too long. 3 people waited, 2 she didn't know, 1 she did. The lieutenant from the summit stood near the wall, hands clasped behind his back. He met her eyes and nodded, restrained but sincere. He looked different out of uniform, less rigid, more human. They didn't ask her to introduce herself. They didn't ask for her record. They asked her what she'd noticed. "At the summit," one of them said, "before everything went wrong." Mara took a breath. "You were loud," she said calmly. "All of you, not in volume, in presence. Authority tends to fill space until it can't hear what's small anymore." No one interrupted. "You train people to look for obvious threats," she continued. "Weapons, raised voices, aggression. But danger doesn't like attention, it waits. It hides behind distractions. Your protocols assume compliance from chaos. Chaos doesn't comply." The woman from the warehouse watched closely, eyes sharp but open. "What would you change?" she asked. Mara leaned back slightly. "I wouldn't change procedures first. I'd change posture, teach people to listen without needing credit. Teach them that the person with the least to lose is often the one you should watch most carefully." The lieutenant shifted his weight, thoughtful. They talked for 2 hours, about human behavior, about stress responses, about how people under pressure revert not to training but to habit. Mara spoke sparingly, choosing her words with care. She didn't dramatize, she didn't embellish. She spoke like someone who'd paid for every insight in blood or silence. When it ended, there was no handshake, just an understanding. "You'll consult," the woman said, "on your terms." Mara nodded, "And I walk if those terms change." "Fair," the woman replied. Weeks passed quietly. Mara didn't move into an office. She didn't attend briefings with flags behind podiums. She met small groups in plain rooms and asked uncomfortable questions. She watched how people stood when they thought no one important was looking, how they spoke to assistants, how they reacted to uncertainty. She corrected gently, sometimes sharply, always honestly. Not everyone liked her. Some dismissed her outright. A civilian, a woman, no current clearance, no visible scars they could respect. She didn't argue. She let time do the work. At one training, she asked a room full of seasoned security professionals to close their eyes. "Tell me what you hear," she said. They listed HVAC hums, footsteps, distant traffic. She waited. Then she asked them what they'd missed. When they opened their eyes, a young intern stood by the door, trembling slightly, holding a stack of papers she'd dropped. "She's been standing there for 2 minutes," Mara said quietly. "No one saw her because she wasn't a threat." The room shifted uncomfortably. "That's how danger walks in," Mara added, wrapped in assumptions. Afterward, the intern thanked her, not for the lesson, but for noticing. Mara drove home that night with a strange weight in her chest, not pride, something closer to responsibility rediscovered. She thought about Iris, about the other girl in the transit hub, about how often children were the first to sense when something was wrong and the last to be believed. Her phone rang late that evening. Different number, different tone. "Mara Kincaid," the voice said, older, measured, familiar in a way that reached back through years. She closed her eyes. "Yes," she said. "This is Admiral Calder." She listened as he spoke, about reforms, about advisory roles, about a cultural rot that didn't respond to punishment alone. "I don't need another hero," he said. "I need someone who understands restraint." Mara stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker like uncertain stars. "I don't want my name on anything," she said, "and I won't be paraded as an example." "I wouldn't insult you that way," Calder replied. She considered. She always did. "I'll help," she said finally, "but only if you're willing to be uncomfortable." A pause, then a soft exhale. "Good," he said, "so am I." After the call, Mara sat on her couch and let the quiet settle again. Different now, less hollow, more earned. She thought about how close she'd come to disappearing completely. How easy it would have been to keep loading crates and teaching breathing techniques on weekends, never stepping forward again. But some forms of silence aren't peace. They're avoidance dressed up as survival. She understood now that redemption wasn't about returning to who you were before the damage. That person no longer existed. Redemption was about choosing what you carried forward and what you set down. Mara didn't need forgiveness. She needed alignment. The next morning she put Iris's drawing on the refrigerator, crooked, held up with a plain magnet, no frame. It reminded her why she stayed grounded, why she listened, why she moved when others froze. Not because she was special, but because she paid attention. And in a world obsessed with being seen, sometimes the most powerful act is simply noticing and refusing to look away. Why did the weight feel heavier now that she'd chosen to carry it again? Mara realized it during the first full briefing she didn't officially attend. She stood at the back of the room, coffee cooling in her hand, listening to people with rank and reputation discuss risk as if it were a spreadsheet. Charts glowed on screens. Probabilities were assigned. Words like acceptable loss floated casually through the air. No one noticed when a junior analyst's voice faltered halfway through a sentence. No one noticed the way his foot tapped, fast, uneven, every time a certain corridor came up on the map. Mara noticed. She always noticed. She didn't interrupt. She waited until the meeting dissolved into small talk and polite exits. Then she approached the analyst quietly, matching his pace as he packed up. "You okay?" she asked, neutral tone. No authority, no pressure. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Yeah, just tired." Mara nodded. "Me too." She let the silence do the work. After a moment he exhaled. "My sister works in that building," he said softly. The one on slide 12. Mara felt something settle into place. Not surprise, confirmation. Have you told anyone? She asked. He shook his head, didn't seem relevant. It is, Mara said, just not to people who don't know how fear hides. She guided him toward a side room and helped him put words to what he'd been carrying alone. By the time he left, his shoulders had dropped an inch. Not fixed, but lighter. That night Mara wrote notes by hand. Not reports, observations, patterns, who spoke over whom, who deferred too quickly, who filled silence because it made them uncomfortable. She didn't send the notes right away. She waited, watched, let the system reveal its blind spots. Her role remained unofficial, which suited her. She moved between departments like a rumor, present, influential, impossible to pin down. Some welcomed her, others resented her. A few tried to test her, pushing boundaries with subtle condescension. She never rose to it. She let outcomes speak. During one exercise, a simulated evacuation stalled because a senior officer insisted on maintaining formation. Mara stepped forward calmly. People don't die in straight lines, she said. The officer bristled. Protocol. Doesn't breathe, Mara finished. They do. The simulation resumed with adjustments. Evacuation times dropped by 30%. No one thanked her. She didn't expect them to. Late one evening, as she packed up to leave, the lieutenant found her again. He'd been promoted since the summit. The patch on his shoulder was new, still stiff. They're listening, he said. Mara slung her bag over her shoulder. They're adapting, that's different. He smiled faintly. Still counts. They walked out together into the cool night air. He hesitated before speaking again. I used to think leadership meant certainty, he said. Now I think it means tolerance for doubt. Mara stopped and looked at him, really looked. That's how you keep people alive, she said. You leave room for what you don't know. He nodded, absorbing it like a lesson he'd been waiting for. As weeks turned into months, Mara felt the slow erosion of a boundary she'd built long ago. Not the dangerous kind, the isolating kind. She still went home alone, still volunteered on weekends, still wore plain clothes, but people began to seek her out, not for answers but for perspective. A young woman in logistics asked how to be taken seriously without becoming hard. Mara considered the question carefully. Don't trade your empathy for volume, she said. People will try to convince you that's the cost of authority. It is. The woman smiled, relieved. Mara didn't say that the balance came with its own price. Some nights the old dreams returned. Not violent, just persistent. Faces without names. Decisions replayed with different outcomes. She'd wake before dawn and sit on the edge of her bed, breathing through the residual tension. She didn't regret coming back. But she felt the wear. The call that changed everything came on an ordinary afternoon. No urgency in the voice. That worried her more than panic ever could. We have an issue, the woman from the warehouse said. Internal. Mara closed her eyes. How internal? Someone been ignoring your recommendations, the woman replied. On purpose. That narrowed it down less than it should have. Mara arrived at the facility an hour later. The atmosphere was tight. Conversations cut short when she entered. People avoided eye contact, not out of guilt but fear. She was shown footage, a recent training drill, a near miss brushed aside as luck. Mara watched silently, rewinding the clip twice. The threat indicators were subtle but clear. A delay here, a miscommunication there, all traceable to one decision-maker overriding adjustments for the sake of optics. Who signed off on this? She asked. A name was given, senior, influential, untouchable in the traditional sense. Mara nodded. Get me a room. The meeting that followed was uncomfortable by design. She didn't accuse, she asked questions, calm ones, specific ones, questions that forced the answers to contradict each other. The man grew defensive, then dismissive. "You're overreacting," he said. "We can't redesign everything for edge cases." Mara leaned forward slightly. "Edge cases are where systems fail," she said. "That's why they matter." He scoffed. "You're seeing ghosts." Mara held his gaze. "I'm seeing patterns. Ghosts don't leave patterns." Silence stretched. Others in the room shifted. No one stepped in. "You don't like being questioned by someone without rank," Mara continued evenly. "I understand that, but this isn't about hierarchy. It's about consequence." The man stood abruptly. "This conversation is over." Mara stood too. "So is your plausible deniability." The fallout was slow but decisive. Audits followed, reviews, quiet reassignments. The system resisted as it always did, but it bent. Not because Mara demanded it. Because the truth, once spoken clearly, is hard to unhear. That night Mara walked home instead of driving. The city felt different when experienced at street level. Messier, more honest. She passed a playground where a little girl was being lifted onto a swing by her father. The child laughed, unafraid of the height because someone steady stood behind her. Mara stopped and watched for a moment. She thought about how many people assumed strength looked like dominance, how rarely they recognized it as patience. Her phone buzzed. A message from Iris's father. A photo attached, his daughter at a school play smiling wide, a paper crown crooked on her head. "Thank you," the message read, "for staying." Mara smiled despite herself. She reached her apartment and stood on the balcony, the city humming below. She traced the scar on her forearm absent-mindedly. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a marker, proof of continuity. She knew the path she'd chosen would never be easy. There would always be resistance, always someone who mistook quiet for weakness, always a system that preferred comfort over correction. But she also knew this. She didn't need permission to protect. She didn't need recognition to matter. And she didn't need to be loud to be effective. Because real resilience doesn't announce its return. It shows up, listens, stands between harm and the vulnerable, even when the cost is being misunderstood. Especially then. Why did it feel harder to walk away now than it ever had to stay? Mara sensed the ending before it arrived. Not because someone warned her, but because patterns always close themselves if you watch long enough. The system had shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Conversations changed tone when she entered rooms. Decisions slowed. People paused before dismissing small voices. The work she'd come back to do was taking root, and that meant her presence would soon become unnecessary. That was always the goal. She stood alone in a quiet hallway after her last scheduled consultation, the building nearly empty. Evening light filtered through narrow windows, dust floating in the air like unfinished thoughts. For a moment, she rested her palm against the cool wall and let herself feel the fatigue she'd been ignoring. Not physical exhaustion, moral weight. The kind that came from carrying responsibility without ownership, influence without authority. She didn't resent it, but she was ready to set it down. The woman from the warehouse found her there, footsteps soft, respectful. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. Mara nodded. "It's time." "You could stay," the woman offered. "Make this permanent." Mara shook her head gently. "Permanent things get rigid. Rigid things break." They stood together in silence, listening to the building breathe. Somewhere a cleaning crew laughed quietly. Ordinary life continuing, oblivious to how close it sometimes came to the edge. "You changed things," the woman said finally. Mara looked down the hallway, remembering the summit, the cuffs, the laughter, Iris's grip around her leg. "I reminded people," she said. "They did the changing." The woman smiled. "That's not how history will remember it." Mara didn't respond. History had never been her concern. Her last stop before leaving was the Veteran Center. Not because it was required, because it grounded her. She sat with the kids in the common room, teaching them a new game, one that looked like clapping patterns but was really about focus and breath. They laughed when they messed up, tried again without shame. One boy asked her why she always wore the same boots. She shrugged, "They're comfortable." That answer satisfied him completely. As she left, the coordinator thanked her, asked if she'd be back next weekend. "Maybe," Mara said, and meant it. She drove home as night fell, the city lights blurring into something almost gentle. At her apartment, she packed slowly. Not everything, just enough. She wasn't running, she was repositioning. Iris's drawing went into her bag, carefully folded. The challenge coin followed, wrapped in cloth. She paused over it for a moment, thumb tracing the edge. Not pride, not nostalgia, just acknowledgement of a chapter closed with integrity. Her phone buzzed once more before she turned it off. A message from the lieutenant. "Thank you for teaching us how to see." Mara typed a reply, then deleted it. Some lessons didn't need reinforcement. She stepped onto the balcony one last time, breathing in the night air. The stars were faint, dulled by the city glow, but they were there if you knew how to look. She traced the old scar on her forearm, not out of habit this time, but as a reminder. Pain survived, healed, integrated. She thought about the little girl at the summit, about the one in the transit hub, about all the moments that never made headlines because someone quiet stepped in before disaster announced itself. She locked the apartment and walked away before doubt could catch up. Weeks later, a training module circulated through agencies nationwide. Anonymized footage. No names. No hero narrative. Just examples of awareness, restraint, and human-centered response. New protocols emphasized listening, grounding, protecting without posturing. Some scoffed. Most adapted. And somewhere in a different city, Mara loaded crates at another warehouse. Same plain clothes, same steady movements. A young coworker nearly dropped a pallet and froze. Mara stepped in calmly, redirected, no drama. "You okay?" she asked. The coworker nodded, shaken but unharmed. "Yeah, thanks." Mara smiled faintly and went back to work. That evening, she volunteered at a different center, taught a new group of kids how to find exits without fear, how to trust their instincts without panic. Parents watched her quietly, sensing depth without being able to name it. Later, alone in a modest room, she sat by a window and looked up at the stars again. Clearer here, brighter. She felt no urge to explain herself, no need to be remembered. She had learned something essential over the years, something no uniform or title could grant. That strength doesn't always roar. That courage doesn't demand witnesses. That the most meaningful acts often happen in the margins, carried out by people the world has already decided not to see. Myra closed her eyes and let the quiet settle, earned this time, not imposed. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.